as we can. Squarebooks has a very active schedule of virtual events, and you may see announcements for those by visiting our website, squarebooks.com. There you may also sign up for our weekly email newsletter, Speed Reader. We also post events and other book news on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And on our YouTube channel, you can see recordings of past events. And this event later on in 24 hours, if it's so good you want to watch it again. Upcoming, our next events, we have 3 events on Tuesday, May 4th. So we are calling that Super Zooms Day. They're all sort of very different events, but if you want to attend all of them, you're welcome. At 2 p.m. Central Time, which I should mention that all of our times are Central Time, Squarebooks is pleased to partner with Tattered Cover Bookstore in Denver, Colorado for the launch of our longtime friend of the bookstore, W. Bruce Cameron, in support of his latest book and the sequel to the beloved Dog's Way Home, A Dog's Courage. He'll be joining conversation with Adriana Trigiani, the irrepressible Trigiani. This event is free to attend, but registration is required. There might be a puppy show and tell, and we do have signed book plates for that book. At 5 p.m., we'll be partnering with the publisher Farrar, Straus and Giroux and fellow indie bookstores, Moon Palace Books, Next Chapter Bookstore, and Oblong Books in celebration of River Solomon and their new book, Sorrowland. Your purchase of Sorrowland below entitles you to access this exclusive virtual event. The first 50 people to purchase from Squarebooks will also receive a signed book plate by River Solomon. Then at 6:30, we have a local event for Elizabeth High School, and her book is called Come On Over. It is her 4th cookbook. This makes a great gift for Mother's Day. Her event's going to be very special. She will be in the kitchen doing a demo and talking with the comedian Heather McMahon. And this event is a ticketed event and includes a signed copy of the book. It also enters one into a raffle for a chef dinner and demonstration by Elizabeth in Oxford for you and 19 of your closest friends. And also the part of the proceeds are going to benefit St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. So, it's going to be a great event, good food, good time, good cause. So I urge y'all all to consider that among the other events. But today we are here for the Sourcebooks Southern Salon, and we have 3 authors with us today, and we are so glad that y'all could join us. First, we have Kelly Mustian, The Girls in the Stilt House. She grew up in Natchez, Mississippi, and her work has appeared in numerous literary journals and commercial magazines. She's a past recipient of a Blumenthal Writers Award and a Regional Artist Grant from the North Carolina Arts and Science Council. She currently lives in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina. The Girls in the Stilt House is her debut novel. Publisher Weekly has called it a nearly flawless tale of loss, perseverance, just a second.
Redemption.
Pregnant pause there, and redemption. It's topping the list of debut novels this spring. So congratulations to that, Kelly. Also joining us is Lindsay Rogers Cook. Her book is called Learning to Speak Southern.
Love
This
that
is coming
title.
June 1, I think,
First.
Lindsay.
Mm-hmm.
And she is a senior editor for digital storytelling at the New York Times. She was previously at the U.S. News and World Report. She is the author also of How to Bury Your Brother, a book that Patty Callahan Henry said, Lindsay Cook is a radiant new voice in Southern fiction. This is a book and an author who will grab your heart and not let go even after the very last page. Lindsay lives in Hoboken, New Jersey, but she is a native of Georgia and graduated from the University of Georgia. Leah Weiss, All the Little Hopes, is a Southern writer born in North Carolina and raised in the foothills of Virginia. She retired from Virginia Episcopal School in 2015, and her debut novel, If the Creek Don't Rise, was released in 2017. So that's a pretty good retirement plan.
It has been perfect.
This is her follow-up, All the Little Hopes, and this will be released on July 27th. It has received advanced praise from such great writers as Wiley Cash, who said, like all great Southern writers, Leah Weiss's magic turns the local into the universal. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So welcome y'all to the our virtual Square Books and Sourcebooks Southern Salon. And thank y'all so much for joining us. I'd love to have you each give us just, I guess, a little bit more than the elevator pitch, but let us know a little bit about your novel. And I think we will go in chronological order of publication date. So Kelly's book is already out. So would you tell us a little bit about The Girls in the Stilt House?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I am so glad to be here at Square Books. It's so close to the setting of my novel, and it's very close to where I started my first fledgling writing. I grew up in Natchez. So my book is The Girls in the Stilt House. It's Southern fiction, and I think of it as part historical fiction, part Southern Gothic, and part literary fiction. I wanted to write the kind of book that I like to read, books that are steeped in place with a landscape that's sort of a character itself, characters whose relationships are complex and surprising, and language that's lush and atmospheric, all that tucked into a compelling and suspenseful story. That's a lot to strive for, but I hope I came at least a little close to achieving that. It's set, of course, in Mississippi in the 1920s on the old Natchez Trace. It's about two young women, still teenagers, whose lives become entangled by a murder that puts both of them in danger. And there's a secret history that connects the two that only one of them knows about. So Ada grew up in a stilt house hidden away on a bald cypress swamp with a father that nobody would want. She runs away with a fiddler from a traveling carnival, lives in Baton Rouge for about a year, but eventually she finds herself with nowhere to go but back to the swamp. So there she goes, and then something sets her father off. He takes a violent turn, and Ada is saved by a stranger who seems to appear out of nowhere in the middle of the night. That stranger is Matilda. She's the daughter of sharecroppers from the other side of the trace and from across the racial divide. The two girls hide Ada's father's body in an old broken tomb out in the woods on the trace, and they set up housekeeping together. They form kind of a tenuous and complex partnership, but after a while, Ada starts to have questions about why Matilda happened to be in the woods behind the Stilt house that night her father died, and Matilda is not offering any answers. So there are mysteries, there are questionable motives, a couple of nasty villains, and some quiet heroes. It's a story about loss and hardship and danger in the racially oppressive Prohibition-era South, but it's ultimately about hope and about finding one's way. As I said, I grew up in Natchez, Mississippi, and my worldview was shaped by books that I checked out as a kid in the library during some turbulent years of the civil rights movement. Books like, I found an old out-of-print copy at that time of Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave when I was very young. That led me to so many more slave narratives, and then later I found books like Anne Moody's amazing Coming of Age in Mississippi. I always mention that in an event. I think every school child should be given that book to read. It is extraordinary. I was an old soul even as a kid, so I read a lot of the old classic Southern writers of the 20s and 30s and 40s, like Carson McCullers and Robert Penn Warren and Eudora Welty. So all of these books helped me to make sense of the world around me back then. So I came to this story with an understanding of this landscape, both physical and cultural, that was home to these two teenagers. And one of the things I wanted to do in writing this novel was to convey the contrast between beauty and brutality in our world, and often within ourselves. And I hope that readers come away from this story feeling hopeful about our ability to build a better world. So I'll leave things there, and thank you for listening, and I'm eager to hear the other two authors.
Right. Thank you so much, Kelly. And we also, I should maybe take the moment to mention that we do have some signed book plates for this book. So we have signed copies. Lindsay Rogers-Cook, would you like to tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure. So this is Learning to Speak Southern. It's my second book. It centers on a main character, Lex, who is in her mid-20s, and she's been kind of jumping around to various parts of the world, dealing with some trauma from her childhood and kind of trying to outrun her demons, basically. So when the book starts, she suffers a terrible loss when she's in Bali. And that loss forces her to contact her family and her chosen family and biological family back in Memphis, Tennessee. So she contacts her godmother, who gives her a trade. She'll bail her out of the issue that Lex has gotten herself in. But Lex needs to come back to Memphis. And then once she actually comes to Memphis, Cammie, who is her godmother, has some surprises up her sleeve for Lex. She has letters that were written by Lex's late mother. Her death is one of the things that Lex is really running from. And as Lex stays in Memphis and gets these letters every day, she has to deal with things that she thought about herself, about her family, about her best friend, Grant, and kind of solve some mysteries about what really happened about her mother's death, and then deal with the aftermath and how that's going to change her.
All right. Okay. We do not have book plates of Learning to Speak Southern. We actually don't even have the book yet because it won't be released on June 1. But I will just take this opportunity to put you on the spot, Lindsay, and say, would you sign some book plates for us?
I would love to. Anyone who pre-orders, I always offer, if people want to pre-order and then message me on Instagram, I will write you a haiku in your book.
Ooh, all right. Bonus. That's fantastic. All right. And Leah, would you like to tell us about All the Little Hopes?
I would love to. This is my second book. My first one came out about 2 years after I retired. And I remember being shocked at the very beginning. These ladies, especially Lindsay, may remember that somebody would ask you, well, what are you working on next? And I thought, my gosh, I just birthed this baby that took me years to do. And I had to start thinking about it. And I knew I had an idea for another book. And it was really centered back on some conversations I had with my mother back, I'm looking now at 16, 17 years. She had lung cancer. She was one of 15 children born on a tobacco farm in eastern North Carolina that had no running water and no electricity. So my memoirs were my first writing attempts to her stories. But she gave me an interesting nugget when I was recording our conversations. She told me that when she worked tobacco market floor in 1944, that that there had been German POWs, Nazi prisoners of war, that were helping her. And I had never heard of that at that time. I did do a little research and find out, yes, it was true, but there wasn't much at that time. Now there is more. And I thought that that was going to be the thrust of All the Little Hopes, was going to be the German POWs, which did come, by the way, in my home state of North Carolina. There were 18 prison camps. All over America, there were 750,000 prisoners of war that were working in tobacco, cotton, peanuts, timber. So that was the inspiration for this book that took me to my little hometown that did have a camp where the prisoners of war, there were 355 soldiers there. And so I wandered as I was promoting If the Creek Don't Rise. I was wandering through this story, trying to find the characters that were going to tell the story. And there were many that auditioned for the job, but two that came to the front were two young girls named Lucy and Allie Burt. She likes to be called by her nickname, Burt. And they are 13 years old when the book begins. And it is before the prisoners arrive. Lucy leads a charmed life living on a tobacco farm. Her daddy raises honeybees. Her mother was a teacher. They've got a library. They read stories in the evening. And Bert comes from a very hard scrapple family over in Western North Carolina that they end up together to be best friends, and living under the same roof get into a lot of trouble. It sounds a little bit like it is because it has Nancy Drew, and it has missing men, and it has the girls that are so curious, and it has the arrival of the prisoners of war. It sounds a little bit like it could be a YA book, and I'm sure YA would love it. But I loved Wiley's comment on the cover, where he said that they are very big universal issues that the book tackles. These hopes that we're talking about are things that we can all relate to. And our enemies are not necessarily where we think they are, and likewise, our friend is not necessarily who we think they are. So I know one of the little summations that Sourcebooks puts on their little card is that it's a Southern story of friendship forged by books and bees when the timeless troubles of growing up meets the murky shadows of World War II. So it's a historical fiction. It has pieces of my mother's life and my own experiences when I went down to visit as a child. But I have been proud of the book because it is such a plot-driven, with a wonderful storyline that, and anybody who's read If the Creek Don't Rise knows that I had a really powerful, strong ending. I think I almost did as well, maybe did as well with All the Little Hopes. At least that is my hope, that I've delivered a really good, satisfactory ending. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I will put you on the spot as well. On July
Happy to send that
27th,
to you.
will we have book plates for pre-orders?
I will
Thank
be
you.
happy to send those to you.
Thank
Of course we will.
Also, Leah, you, I don't know whether these are shared on a website or anything, but you also, with my copy of the book came a couple of recipes.
Yes.
For Lacy cornbread and Oma's German marble cake.
Yes. Well, the Lacy cornbread, I would give anything to taste my Aunt Susie's Lacy cornbread again. And I'll be honest with you, and I must probably be forthcoming on Facebook to say I try making it and it is so inferior. So don't give up. But she just had the magic touch. I mean, they literally had dinner in the middle of a day, did the full big meal. And when I was going to visit, she always gave me Lacy cornbread, which is just slick with all the little crinkles around the edge. It's and probably done in bacon fat with real butter on it and all those good things. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, we've found out all that it's actually healthy for us now.
Good.
bacon fat's good for your hair or something. I don't know,
Right.
but well, thank y'all so much for telling everybody about your books. When we do these sort of panels, usually we try to, I'll read the books and I'll look for themes that we can all talk about, and y'all are extraordinarily different writers. You just, you both handle dialogue. All of you handle dialogue differently. You all have central characters who are women. Your protagonists. Let's see. Kelly and Leah, you both sort of have a team protagonist, and I guess Lindsay, that like you have your main character, and then you have a character who's we just find out about through her writing. So there's that. But other than that, you just go in very different directions. So we have to kind of talk about the big elephant in the room is that, you are all Southern writers. These books are set in the South, and I'd love to hear how you feel about, do you consider yourself a Southern writer? Do you find that liberating or limiting? And kind of what does that mean for your setting and your characters and for you as a writer? Anybody can go first.
I'll go first.
Okay.
I grew up in Mississippi. I left there at 19, but there's something about where you grew up, where you came of age, that just permeates who you are. It's the place you know better than any other place. I've lived, in 12 states since then. I've lived all over the country. I've even lived in Arctic Alaska, on the 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle. I've really moved around. But when I write, I just keep coming back to Mississippi. I know another author who has a lot of books out from Alabama and hasn't been there in decades and just goes back to Alabama for settings. So it's the landscape that I know so well. As far as considering myself a Southern writer, I live in North Carolina now. I've spent a lot of my life in the South, most of my life in the South. I definitely feel a tie to my Mississippi childhood, and that was very influential in this book. I kind of don't pay attention to that label, Southern fiction. I do kind of I consider myself, this book particularly, to be Southern Gothic light. I kind of think of it mild Southern Gothic. It's not a light subject. It's not a lightly written book, but the Gothic elements are not as strong as, say, Faulkner would be, but they're definitely there. So I do kind of claim that label, but I kind of just write what I want to write, and I am where I'm from, and just leave it to other people to put those labels.
Well, I call myself a Southern writer. I feel like that I relate so well to the characters. And you're right, Kelly, we do write that which we know. And I came from, when I say a family of storytellers, I'm talking about the kind that sat around at the meal tables or out in the yard picking pecans or something, when we would just be telling mostly family story things. I'm the first writer in my family, and I came very, very late to this. I was in my mid to late 50s when I first started writing some memoirs. And of course, I told you a tiny bit about my mother. So you know that would have had, with the whole tobacco farm setting and everything from the ice boxes, to everything about it was something for, as well as good memories of my own childhood that pulled me. And I cut my writing teeth after my mother's memoirs. I cut them on some short story contests. Every time I saw something that gave me a little opening prompt and gave me a number of words and a deadline, and I sent my $5 in and kept my fingers crossed that my story would win. And the story that my first story win did end up becoming my first book. It was an interesting story. It was a 1,500 word, 3-page story that had this young girl. When I wrote down the prompt, which was, I struggle to my feet. She finished that sentence by saying, I straighten my back, I lift my chin, and he hits me again. And I go, oh my gosh, and this Appalachian girl was there in front of me. I mean, in my mind's eye, that was her story. So 3 pages, a little $150 check, and my first little win. And then it was the curiosity of what could I do to take that little story that was filled with hope and promise, and it became pretty much the beginning and the ending of the book. And for me, it was that first book was like amazing studies in character development, because I really love to climb into the skin of a good, strong character. And so I had a whole lot of learning to do for that. But through the short storytelling and through actually Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout was a hugely influential book for me, because it was my first real strong attention as a writer to someone I couldn't look away from, that I detested. I did not like Olive Kitteridge, but we could not stop watching. And so you learned that there were rougher characters that were really a reader could find more compelling. So all of that inspired me, but I definitely call myself a Southern writer. And I think I love the dialogue, I love the dialect, I love the setting. And that also includes Appalachia and my mountains over in Western North Carolina. So I'm not just stuck in the sandy tobacco country, but yeah, in fact, Lindsay, your title, I would love to have stolen that title. That's an absolutely wonderful one, because it does speak to huge elements that I think are universally and timeless. So that's everything from the genteel steel magnolias with their backbone and their hidden messages and things. There's a lot to be said for good Southern writing.
I cannot claim the title. I did not come up with the title, but I do love the title. I think one thing I love about it is that Lex is the main character as a linguist. So it kind of plays off the fact that she's reintegrating into the South, and then also that she loves language and she has this passion for language. On the Southern writer question, my first book was set in Georgia, where I grew up and where my family still lives. And this book is set in Memphis. So it was a bit different, but to me, Southern writing and Southern fiction, it's always very rooted in place, and it has kind of the beauty of the South, but also like the humor and the pain of the South, which those things to me feel uniquely Southern,
Yes.
Especially compared to New York and New Jersey, where I live now. And I miss those things. So it's when I'm writing, it's great to return to those memories. In terms of Memphis, where my second book is set, where Learning to Speak Southern is set, my mother was born there, and my grandparents grew up. My grandfather grew up there. They were married there. They both went to Memphis State University and met there, where he picked her out of the magazine, as characters do in the book. So I think too, just like the other authors on this Zoom, storytelling for me is something that was handed down, and also a way to connect with previous generations and connect with your family. And I think it's great that a lot of us have been able to make those memories and stories into something that is so universal beyond one family.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to ask my other two fellow authors if they had always wanted to be writers, or when that bug bit.
Kelly?
I can say, I've said this before at other events, I read way above my pay grade when I was a kid. A lot of it was to impress my older brother, I think, perhaps. He was about 8 years older than me, so I would read his books. But I was always a big reader, and I always tried, writing things as a kid. But I read my older brother's copy of The Grapes of Wrath. And that was the first time, I was probably in middle school, and it was the first time that I noticed language rather than just the story, his description. And that book is very descriptive. And I fell in love with language. And for me as a writer, I am a sentence first writer. I have to really make myself remember plot. I am all about how the sentence sounds and the melody of the sentence, and I'll get really caught up in that. And so yeah, I did want to be a writer. I did have to really learn how to keep my eye on the arc of the story, though, rather than just
Yes.
playing
Yes.
with words.
Well, we had a question pop through asking how we learned to write Southern dialect. And I'm happy to go first since I saw the little question pop up. And she, by the way, she said she's going to buy all of our books. So we've got ourselves a new fan. This is fantastic. Um, my first book was truly my challenging one, set in the mountains of Appalachia in Western North Carolina. But I happened to go to attend a writing workshop there for, I've been doing that now for the last 7 years or so at Wild Acres, close to Little Switzerland. And that is where pretty much my first book was set. So I did everything from haunt the kitchen help to go to the little cafes and sit with my ear listening to dialect in that area. But of course, we've got the advantage of having YouTube and conversations, which we can listen to and take different notes for. I just remember with both this book and the first book is that I didn't want to have the dialect off-putting. I wanted to have someone say it felt authentic and I was taken there, but not to have someone feel like that they couldn't understand it. And we all know that in some cases, some Southern's almost not understandable if you wrote it exactly as it was spoken. So I think it's that fine line of trying to tell a good story, put you in the proper place, and have enough language to feel like you're taken there, but enough not to put you off. So I don't know whether either of you struggled with that or not, but
My situation is a little bit different from yours, since your book has that strong sense of place and time that is kind of rooted in the dialect. My books are both contemporary, and then Learning to Speak Southern, there is a line of like the 1980s, but it's not really dialect coming from Memphis. I will say that since the main character Lex is a linguist, I use that to play around with a lot of like the Southern isms, because Lex notices those Southernisms and kind of reflects on them, and also kind of reflects on their origins and potential problems with those Southernisms.
Good point.
That's a great question. I would like to say just quickly, I take kind of a different tack with the 1920s language. I am of the camp in just a light touch, so I'm really, really light on dialect. In fact, because there are two different races of characters in my book, what I tried to do was use some language that was universal to the South, to that area at that time. And I picked out words, different words to use for the white character and the black character. Words that both of them would have used, but to kind of distinguish each of them. And I tried to give little hints of Southern language. But what my goal was that whoever was reading the book, whatever race they were from, or whatever circumstances or cultural background they were from, would kind of hear it with their own ear and give their own authenticity to it. So I was very light, just giving hints of language, and that was my goal with that. And I know wonderful Southern writers go both ways. There are definitely two camps on this, and I appreciate both of them. But that's where my book is, just to give people an idea of what to expect.
Kelly, let me ask you a question. Did you have to work with a sensitivity editor for your book, since you were of a different time frame?
Not for the time frame. I first wrote this book very differently. I wrote Matilda, who is the primary black character, from a great distance, a very wide distance. She only spoke in the last chapter. She was very mysterious until the end, and a very trusted advisor, someone in my professional in my writing arena.
Yeah.
Loved Matilda. It was my agent, I'll just say it. It was, he said, bring Matilda forward and give her equal time. Being from Mississippi, when I lived there in that time period, I was very hesitant to do that. I didn't want to overstep. I didn't want to encroach on anyone else's experience. I had spent my life reading Black literature and watching and listening, especially listening, and seeing what was going on around me. So I didn't come to do it lightly. I took a long time to decide whether to do it, and part of my decision was when I lived in Natchez, where I grew up. The demographics there when I was growing up were about half and half, half black, half white. And now I think it's, if I've got this right, I think it's even more predominantly black now. And I decided that the idea of keeping the black characters in a time and place when race was everything, racial issues were just in your face all the time, keeping them in the background and not giving that one character, Matilda, equal time was started to feel like maybe my agent was right. Maybe it was a form of exclusion in itself. So I tread very carefully with that. And there are black people in my family, children whose faces were in my mind as I was writing all of these difficult scenes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't come to it lightly, and I am still listening. I'm eager to know what people's reaction to it is, and this was extraordinarily important to me as I wrote. The number one issue, everyone who knows me will say, I heard her struggle with this. It's just really, really important to me. So
I agree. We had a question about our agent. My agent is with Fletcher and Company, Rebecca Gradinger. Kelly, I think that
Lindsay posted hers, and
okay.
if you want to share your agent, that's great.
After I just put
if
that
you're not comfortable,
spoke of him, but it's Peter Steinberg. He's with Fletcher and Company.
all right.
Best agent ever.
We're all going to argue on that one.
So your characters are all they're all women, and they are very different time periods. Actually, I wasn't quite sure exactly when yours was set, Lindsay, but is it in the 80s, or is that the mothers in the 80s?
No, it's set in like contemporary time, pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And then the mother's story is set in the 80s. I actually had more exact dates when like I had it set in 2020 explicitly before COVID started, and I had to like wind the entire thing back a year.
Yeah.
I think that's great, but it's very interesting to say it's like, kind of World War II era 1920s, contemporary, but you have all these women characters, all very strong, but they all have to really kind of find their way, and they look to other women to do that with, or girls.
Yeah.
Okay, so I found that very interesting. I would like to know, Kelly, you told us about some of your early reading that were your influences, and I would love to know both what influenced all of your writing, who you kind of looked to when you were, learning, and who you're reading now.
I can go. So I would say that I feel like for each of my books, I had a book that I read and that I loved so much. And I was like, I want to write a book like that. And for my first book, that was The Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. I read all of his books. He was a huge inspiration for me. When I was kind of a young writer, I started writing my first book when I was 21, and had read all of those. For learning to speak Southern. The book that kind of helped spark that initial spark for me was Claire Fuller. No, not Claire Fuller. The Swimming Lessons. I'll post a link to it, but that is also a fantastic book that I recommend. In terms of what I'm reading now, I just read a few fantastic books. I read a lot, as I'm sure the other authors do. I just finished The Girl with Seven Names, which is a book about a North Korean defector who eventually comes to the United States, and kind of it's real, it's like nonfiction, and all the things that she has to go through. And then I also read How to Fail at Flirting, which is a book by an African-American author that is very steamy, but also very fun and romantic comedy-esque. And yeah, those are some of my recommendations. I can post.
Right. Great. And it looks like Caitlin on the ball has been posting those, the links to those.
Yeah.
Leo, I think it's your turn.
Well, what I'm reading right now is by Kate Moore, who wrote Radium Girls. I had the good fortune to meet Kate up in Milwaukee back for Winter Institute in 2017, about 8 months before If the Creek Don't Rise comes out. Her Radium Girls was a massive success, and she has since written the book, The Woman They Could Not Silence. And it is just, I told Kate that I started reading it a few days ago just to kind of skim. And all of a sudden I'm in 25 pages. Her book is about this thick, and about that much at the back is this amazing, her research is just mind boggling. You know, I'm honored to think of my books as being historical fiction, but they don't fall into any of that kind of classification. So I highly recommend Kate's amazing, amazing work. She's from England. We have kept in touch in the last 4 years and just been encouraging each other. So someone had asked earlier, by the way, how long it took us to write our books or something. I think that's always an interesting question. I mean, when I first started writing, I did not publish my first book until almost 12 years later. I had a book that didn't sell, stories that did sell. I mean, you know, you just are grabbing your time. But for me, it's very pokey. Some of my friends have said the second book has happened fast, but it's been 2 years, 2.5 years of pretty intense work. That is a miracle that it's here, but meaning that you're doing everything else to support your other book. So it's a slow process for me. I don't do that 1 a year, 2 a year type of thing. So, and I'm happy with that. I like taking my time. I don't like to let go and then wish that I had redone something. That percolating, that simmering pot of stew really does take time in my writing world as well.
Right. Kelly, would you like to answer that question as well about how long it takes you?
You know, I would really too like to mention some wonderful authors as we were talking about.
Yes, I was going to go back to that as well.
I just wrote this down real quickly. I wrote some of my favorite people down that I'd love to mention. I do love Appalachian fiction. So Silas House, I love, but Idra Novy, one of my favorite writers, Miriam Taves, Jacqueline Woodson, Colson Whitehead, Lee Smith, Sebastian Barry, Anthony Doerr, Lauren Groff, all of those people. As far as what I've read lately, I'm reading Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell right now. Fantastic book. I just read, and I have this one beside me, I just read an early copy of Fox and I. This is like nothing I've ever read. It's officially a memoir, but it's part memoir, it's part nature book, part fantasy. It's just an amazing book that will be out soon. And also Raft of Stars by Andrew J. Graff. I loved that. It's something between like Wiley Cash's Land More Kind Than Home and Tony Early's Jim the Boy. It's just a lovely story. So definitely wanted to name some of those names there. So many more. And I don't remember what the other question was. I'm sorry.
All right. Well,
length of time for you to write your book?
Oh gosh, this The Girls in the Stilt House, I worked actively on it for about 3 years. I didn't have a deadline, so I was able to take as much time as I wanted. but it really took me much longer than that because I set it aside so many times. That is so important to my writing, to be able to set it aside for weeks or even months if possible.
Yes.
Look at it and then pick it up, and you instantly see everything that's wrong with it. You see everywhere you went wrong. You can't do that when, at least I can't, when I'm in the thick of writing. It's a real luxury to be able to have that much time. I don't have that much time now that I have this nasty deadline, but that's my ideal situation. So I spent a long time on this book.
Have you, Kelly, sorry, because you've only just published this month, but have you started on your next book?
Yes, yes. I'm not talking too much about it, but I do have, it will be with Sourcebooks, and I do have, like I said, this deadline, which I've never worked under before. It is about two women who, as children, they discovered that they weren't biologically related. They had a different mother. They found something that led them to that discovery. And they made a pact when they were young to never tell anyone. It's not really in the book, it's just backstory. But as adults, the older sister decides to dig into that secret past of her younger sister and find out where she came from and who her mother was. Most of the book is that story of who was that mother and how did she lose her child. It's set mostly in Mississippi, almost entirely in the Natchez, Jackson area. And in the Depression. So it covers the 1930s, and then the sisters as adults. It's a side storyline in the 70s, her digging into these clues.
Sounds
Thanks
really
for sharing
interesting.
that with us. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lindsay.
I was just saying that sounds really good. I'm excited to hear that.
Yes.
I was going to ask actually both you, because Kelly, this is her debut, which is doing really well.
Wonderful.
And y'all are about to publish your sophomore book. So, as experienced authors with now 2 books under your belt, do you have any advice for the debut writer about challenges in writing that second one?
Oh, you're talking about writing or talking about book tours or talking about writing or?
Whatever wisdom you would like to impart, share with all of us.
All right, Kelly, I'm going to tell you the real secret of which I do not, I'm going to say don't sweat the small stuff, but I sweat the small stuff all the time, but I'm trying this time around to really enjoy the ride more. Last time I was really, I think, concerned about trying to control things that were out of my control, so that's worthless or not worth your time. So I think it's just to enjoy the ride. We are all in enviable positions with books that are out and that will find a wonderful market. I will share this tiny enviable piece with you, and I say because I'm so happy with it. My husband and I will be leaving on Friday to do what we did with the first book. We're going to take a 5-week tour around America. We've got 42 bookstores, and Mississippi sadly is not on our list. I so wish that it was, but to go and just to drop off the advanced readers copies. We've got gift baskets and just little things to let them know about the book, but then we get to enjoy the country at the same time. We're kind of putting the book on a little more solid footing. So we'll head all the way out to California and then up to Glacier and down through Yellowstone and back across and all. So we've done most of this trip before and had a wonderful time. This time we've extended it a little bit. So we are in the enviable position to be retired and to have the times to be able to do something like this. So, and we've had our 2 shots and we're going to be super careful. And I think we only have one public event that will be outside in a cocktail setting sort of thing. So we're eager to meet our reading public again, aren't we, ladies?
Well, there you go, Kelly and Lindsay. Y'all just need to retire.
There you go.
It might be a little while for me still, but we'll see. We'll see. You told my boss to ask.
So, Lindsay, do you have any wisdom?
I think my wisdom is that as someone who also wrote their second book on a deadline, you will survive. And also during COVID, I want to say. So it was very stressful. And I don't think I would do it again, but it's good to just rip that Band-Aid off get the second
Uh-huh.
book. And
Yeah.
I actually think that having the deadline forced me to be like a much more functional writer, and in the end, it was good for the book. So
Yeah.
you'll be okay, Kelly.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Good
I'm
luck
not
with
sure
that,
if I
sweetheart.
can, if I
Yeah.
will survive this.
Yeah.
I am so not I don't write from an outline. I don't have a structure. I
I
start.
didn't either, but
I
you're gonna
don't
have
either.
to.
And you have to. You have to try to
Yeah.
do that to meet this deadline. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's whole
Well,
different.
you know that your characters will not follow the line of that deadline, but that's then you deal with that.
Uh-huh.
You can't put them in a little box. So
All I can say is listening to y'all talk about other writers and their books, and that, I realized that, and having read your books, that, really good readers make the best writers. So keep
yes.
reading and keep writing.
Yes.
I'm afraid we're out of time now,
Oh,
but I thank y'all so much for joining us for this conversation. And yeah, it was a fun group. I'll show the books again one more time, if everybody can read that. The Girls in the Stilt House is out now. Kelly Mustian, Learning to Speak Southern.
Mhm.
Lindsay Cook will be out June 1st. And All the Little Hopes will be out July 27th by Leah Weiss. And we
Yes.
will have signed book plates for
We
all
will do
3
that.
books.
Yeah.
So you're welcome to order them. And thank y'all again for
Thank you
joining
for
us.
your
This has
time,
been a
Lynn. This
lot
has
of
been
fun.
lovely.
Thank you so much.
So much for hosting. And thanks everyone for coming.
Have a ball with this book, Kelly. Enjoy it.
Thank you. If you haven't bought my book yet, that's out. Please, and you're here, please consider buying it from Square Books, because independent bookstores are an author's best friend.
Yes. Absolutely.
And
Thank
it's
you,
so
Kelly.
good. Such a good book. I recommend.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.
all.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.